no different than police, no different than finance. All those departments operate the same way. That's all I'm saying. I don't need to go in and try to rework their estimates.
And if there's a conflict between the EUB and the city, obviously,
It's your baby, no matter what.
we are responsible.
You are responsible no matter what that ordinance.
Yeah, we need, but there needs to be some communication when there is a conflict, because,
Well,
you know,
sometimes that's been more or less interpreted as permission. And when it comes down to it, you're responsible.
that is correct.
So the decision, that's what I was saying, there's no single point of conflict resolution. That's all I've said in this. There's no referee.
Well, that's more than just, that encompasses more than just financial decisions.
Yes.
I mean,
That's why we're here.
there's no point of conflict resolution, period. So I think within there maybe there needs to be maybe there needs to be an arbitration or some sort of a,
I think there was some confusion about the level of authority of the board.
Sure.
And that's what caused some conflict. But I met with Mary and I met with Bill, and I think people, and I know the mayor's been meeting with them, I think that confusion is gone now.
Okay.
I think they understand their responsibilities and ability, and they understand that you can pull the plug on this thing anytime that they don't follow what the ordinance says now or will say in the future.
Okay.
Just give the staff some direction to redraft that paragraph and get the kind of accountability that you need and come back to you with the revised draft.
Okay.
Mayor, can I?
By all means.
Just for clarification, the way the statutes and the way the state recognizes the utility is a division, just like the other departments. It probably would be easier if when staff's developing the overall city budget, that budget gets developed by finance. The input is provided just like every other director. Every other department director is developing, making recommendations, and their budget's going to the finance director. And then we sit down, finance and administration, we'll sit down and go over it, and then it's presented. It's not an independent budget that is adopted by an independent set of board members. Because that's the way the state recognizes it. That's the way the auditors recognize it. When they came in and did our audit, that's the way they recognize it as well. And the only way to really give that authority away is with a separate entity. So it's probably going to be easy to just have it be developed, and the accountability is through the city, through finance, through administration, which is what the statutes say.
So then do we
It's a
just
division.
have to draft another
We would basically,
paragraph or something?
we would be, some of the things where we're saying that the budget is going to the board and the board's approving it, that's not, the state doesn't recognize that. Statutes do not recognize authority for the board to develop a budget independent of the city.
And that's why
And so individually, you'll recall when we developed the budget, we asked each of you individually to sign that budget. You're affixing your signature, assuming that accountability, without reviewing and approving it. So you're really signing it without that. And I think what we're saying is, based on the audit, the last audit and this new auditor, we really need to kind of fix that. We don't want to ask you to sign off on a budget on something that we haven't brought before you.
Can it be fixed in the process of ordinance writing?
Right.
Yes.
Well,
Well,
yeah, what you're going to do is you're going to go back to, and I've kind of started to mark the sections as I listen to you all and as I listen to our council president talk about the rate section. You're going to go back to the section that talks about accounting, finance, and budget, and instead of talking about it coming to the council and the board approving it, that's not going to exist.
Nope.
It's going to be developed just like the rest of the directors are developing a budget. It's going to be part of the city's budget. We're going to bring it to you after it's vetted through finance and administration. We're going to bring it to you for approval, so that when you sign it, you're signing off on one that's gone through that same process.
So are you saying it's a separate budget, or?
No, it will not be a separate budget, because
So are
the
we
state
already-
statutes don't
We're already
recognize.
doing that, though, right?
No, you're not. No, you're not doing that now. You're signing that you've developed it that way, but the budget's actually going to a board
And they're
for approval, and they're approving it. So even if by ordinance, and by ordinance you've said you want to move that authority, you really can't move that authority.
Okay. You understand where we're going with this? Okay. You have a question or a comment?
Steve. Mark Baldwin,
Name and address.
31115 West 172nd Terrace, Gardner.
Thanks.
I agree with what Ms. Harrison Lee is saying. She's absolutely correct. The authority does stop with the city council. It currently stops with the city council. Currently, we submit our budget ahead of time for your purview. If the issue would become, if you start to say only the budget is handled by the city council, is now every one of those line items needs to be handled by city council. So all the input that the board would have and history and the information that they can provide to that budget would be lost. So right now, you're right. The budget comes to the board and it goes back, but it just needs to, as it comes from the board, it's still going to city council. So there should be a back and forth there.
I think the way it would...
Wait, what's your...
Larry, hold on a second. Christie was starting to
Okay,
speak
sorry.
first.
Yes.
Keith was going to start
I was
after
just
her.
gonna say, I understand what you're saying, Mark, and I guess I feel like we're making this a lot more difficult than what it needs to be, because
Absolutely.
the board, so let just walk with me here. The board says, hey, here's our recommendation for a budget based on what we know. We know the history, we know everything. Whether it's through bill or however ultimately that becomes structured, Laura gets engaged in that. Laura kind of takes that feedback and owns it, just like she does the other department directors. I mean, Laura doesn't sit down and say, Jeff, here's your budget, you know?
Well,
So-
maybe for Jeff, but not for anybody else.
So the only difference is, you know, you have a board now
Right.
who's potentially making recommendations on what those items are. Then it gets presented the same way as every other item, and
That's exactly how it should be done. We've never understood why we have to create a budget that just gets thrown over the fence anyway, because effectively, it's too late for you to do anything with it, and we didn't have any direction on what to do with it in the first place. Other than we have history as to what to do with those rates, how we're going to control our revenue, our estimations, so on and so forth. So if we could work with the finance director, that would be immense. Ultimately, if you can think of the board as just a piece of the director, we're not really the separate group. We're just input to help that director do the best job possible, which is why I was shaking my head earlier, Larry. There's certain decisions that director may not be able to do if he's only under control of city admin or city council because of political pressures, i.e. the water and wastewater lack of maintenance. That can be done in electric because he comes to the board and the board says, I think that's a great idea. We do it. If you think of the EUB as just 5 directors and you just have one line item there, not 2 separate levels of power, it's a whole lot easier to think of this whole issue. We just help the director make the best decisions, and then ultimately that's coming up to city council in every way anyway. Does that make sense?
So if we want to rewrite this ordinance, what you would say, and I think this is reflected by the majority of the UB that I've spoken with in the past, is that if you want to do something like that, you would basically create a situation where you'd have some direct input into the finance department and into Laura. You would submit that directly to Laura. Laura would ask questions back for feedback and give
I do with everyone.
do some collaborative budget setting, making sure that all the members of the UB and the director, as well as that entire department, thinking of it as a department now because it is an agency of the city, would then have collaborative input, which I think is the one thing that's been missing, I think, to a certain extent in this regard. And then you get your objectives met. Finance feels comfortable with the numbers, and they know that they have an accountability stream that goes through the finance department and then on to the city council, and it takes care of itself.
Yes, if the finance director is involved. Right now, for all intents and purposes, we ask for certain numbers from finance. We get those, we plug them in our spreadsheet, we're
And you
done.
toss it back over the fence.
And we toss it back.
Yeah.
But if there was more input because we worked collaboratively,
Yep.
then we would have information as to, okay, this number needs to do